Welcome. I'm here with Ben Zweig, the founder and CEO of Revelio Labs. Ben, how you doing?
Good, good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so excited that you're sharing time with me on this day because you all have some big news coming out today, yeah?
It's a big day for us. Yeah, we just put out this thing we're calling RPLS, Revelio Public Labor Statistics, which is kind of our take on Jobs Friday. So it's every the first Friday of every month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out their data release, and that tells you how many jobs were added to the U.S. economy, and this is what you'd hear on the news of like payroll numbers. So this kind of moves markets. And we made the call to put out our own data release of how many jobs are added or removed from the economy. Because our data is sourced in entirely different ways and it's a unique perspective and has some advantages that we think the world needs. So, decided to put it out there.
Well, yeah, thanks for doing that. Thanks for doing what you've done over the years and building this. Can you talk about going back to the beginning? Why did you start Revelio Labs? And then I would like to talk about obviously this new report that you're going to be delivering each month, and also how organizations can actually utilize the insights that you're presenting. But again, what was the
Yeah.
inspiration for you to start this whole thing?
Yeah, I think, I asked this to myself a lot also, and I don't have a great answer. I have a few different answers. Um, but but yeah, let me kind of, throw a couple narratives at you. So one narrative is I'm an economist. So I'm a labor economist. I did my PhD in economics and have been studying labor markets and different facets of labor market data and analysis. I've done research on social mobility and occupational transformation. And as an economist, for anyone who's taken an economics class, you've probably seen a production function. And in the production function of the economy, you can sort of deconstruct economic inputs into labor and capital. And when you do that deconstruction, you end up finding something along the lines of about 2/3 of the economy is attributable to labor and about 1/3 is attributable to capital. So those are the factors of production that make everything work, that produce all the stuff we have in the world. And that's just like a truth about the economy. And I had spent some time in capital markets. So I was a quant at a hedge fund for a few years. And in capital markets, you know, everyone's got their day job and their Bloomberg terminal. Everyone's got like all the data they could possibly want, like right at their fingertips. It's super scientific, super rigorous. And then after that, I went to work at IBM where I was running a workforce analytics team. And at IBM, I saw, oh, this is the labor market side of things. And it was so not sophisticated. There's no ubiquity around data, there's no shared information, and it's not as scientific of a discipline. And I thought, labor markets are twice as big as capital markets in terms of their economic influence. Biggest markets in the world. Most important markets in the world. This is how everyone spends their time, and it's not very scientific. Not like, there's no standardization, there's no anything. I mean, if you think about what is required to have efficient capital markets, it's good financial data, and the way we get that is through armies of accountants. The whole field of accounting is people that are trained to categorize things and to categorize capital-related information. And there's no one who's trained to categorize labor, and that is just doesn't exist. There's no accountants. There's no we have the Financial Accounting Standards Board, which set the guidelines for how to standardize capital. We don't have a human capital, standards board. We should, but basically thought like, okay, that's a big flaw in our economy. And this was right around the time. So I remember starting, having these thoughts around like 2015, 2016, maybe 2017, and that was right around the time when large language models were coming out. So the foundational large language model was called Word2Vec, and this was the precursor to transformers, which of course powered ChatGPT and all these things that we all know. But the precursor to that was also really powerful, and started messing around in Word2Vec and started trying to create similarities between job titles and skills and work activities and things like that, and started thinking, oh wow, it actually is possible to use LLMs to create standardized taxonomies between organizations. So it is kind of theoretically possible to do this categorization and standardization without armies of accountants, and that's exciting. And then, if that can be done, then it should be possible to standardize between companies, which is what enables this kind of outside-in view of organizations, where you can look at organizations without any affiliations to them. Layered on top of that is this idea that HR data is not just in an HR database. So let me kind of, tell you what I mean by that. So like if you have like an HRIS system, you've got someone's name, their job title, their start date, you've got all this information about a person, and every person is like a row in that database. Now that's private data. Like you'll never access another company's HR database. Like it's super, super locked up. But that information also shows up on that person's resume or that person's LinkedIn profile or something like that. So that information is accessible in the public domain, and that anyone can see it. So if we could kind of take the whole universe of public employment data and kind of restructure that and standardize that and enrich it and address biases and whatever, it would at least be theoretically possible to produce this like universal database that spans across organizations. And that was just an exciting idea, and at some point I'm just like, all right, it's time to quit my job and see what this becomes.
Wow. And so that was, you said 2015, 2016?
That was like when we were kicking around the ideas. We started working on the core technology in like 2017, just like nights and weekends, me and a couple co-founders, and then launched the company in 2018.
Okay.
But really only started selling it in 2019. So it's actually kind of, there was a while of just like, building the tech for it.
So what would you describe the space that you play in? Because there's a lot of naming conventions floating out there. There's labor market statistics, there's talent intelligence, people analytics, workforce planning. I mean, what do you call yourselves?
I call us workforce intelligence. Now, that's not like a formal category, but I like it because I think others in the space call themselves labor market intelligence. And I think what I don't like about labor market intelligence is it implies that the unit of analysis is a market. And I don't think it has to be. So what most of our clients use this information to analyze companies. Companies, primarily the unit of analysis. So they're looking at the hiring rate, attrition rate at companies, the job posting volume, the time to fill, whatever, all these metrics for companies. And of course they can segment that by occupation, skills, seniority, geography, demographics, whatever, any various employee characteristics. But mostly it can be done at a micro level. And I think calling it labor market intelligence, it implies that you're just analyzing like a geography or a role or a skill or something, which I think is just a lot. It's just lower fidelity. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think kind of tying this back to our public data release. We're giving away macro data, so we have made the call to basically not make money selling macroeconomic data. We are giving it away for free. Now, part of that is like, it's our mission. There's concern of like credibility at the BLS, and we think the world needs it, and it's very like on mission to do it. But I think another part of it is that we don't think the future of this data is going to be in labor market intelligence. We don't think anyone should be paying money for market level data. We think the future is in competitive intelligence and micro level data, and that's where we want to play. That's where we prefer that the market shifts toward. We want to see a maturing of the space, And we think that means shift toward more high resolution data.
So workforce intelligence, I absolutely love it. And I have colleagues going back 20 plus years who would also celebrate that naming convention because it speaks to the value that's being generated as opposed to the underlying process by which that value is created. So I
Hmm.
want to just ask you, given this higher fidelity data, how do you see it being used within organizations? Because if I understand correctly, if it's competitive intelligence, you see employers being the buyers, and then it invites the question, who within these organizations are the buyers, and how do they use it? So I bundled 18 questions there, but
Yeah, yeah, no, there's a lot to unpack. It's pretty varied. I mean, I think the vision for who we'd want to sell to is really anyone in HR that is analytical, that is in the business of analyzing data, that just like of course there's a procedural part of HR, and that's not really what we serve, but it's the practitioners in HR that that use data to make decisions that are involved in some analysis. And there's different pockets of that. So one, the simplest is talent intelligence. Talent intelligence is like, a lot of different things, but it supports sourcing. So they're finding pockets of talent. They're doing some competitive benchmarking. They're supporting TA. They're supporting SWP. So that's and they I think what talent intelligence has really established themselves as is kind of the owner of external data. And I mean this both as like you know, um, a recognition of what talent intelligence has accomplished, but also a what I think should be a warning sign for people analytics. I think people analytics, is full of the smartest, most interesting people you'll meet. My critique on people analytics is that they haven't been as open to external data. I think people analytics, have run the risk of sort of positioning themselves as the owners of internal data, where they are the people that know how to like finagle the HRIS and the ATS and the LMS. That they're the people who own this data, and they can like use it for all sorts of like analyses. But I think that is a dividing line that doesn't need to exist. I think I'd love to see a world where there's more integration between internal and external data. But either way, I mean, people analytics has been more insular, more internally focused, and there's tons of interesting analyses to do with that. They're certainly busy doing productive work. But I think this dividing line like should be merged. Like I'd love to see people analytics and talent intelligence kind of sit within the same organization, which some companies are doing, but it's slow. And then strategic workforce planning is another one. So I think that's in some way the most interesting because it's changing the most with AI. So ultimately, the question of strategic workforce planning is like, do we have the people we need to complete our goals? And if not, how do we bridge those gaps? How do we get there? So I think there's a question that's inherently strategic, and strategy is about differentiation. Strategy is about benchmarking ultimately. So understanding like what you should be doing it really requires some understanding of like where you're positioned in the market, where you're positioned commercially, and I think that requires more of an outside view. So that's interesting for that reason. But there's also something I think there's a nuance to that I think is getting more recognition. That a company, any company, is has work to do. There's a set of tasks. There's a set of work activities to be done, and the way that those get done is not obvious. There's no strict mapping from like you could think of a job as a bundle of work activities. I mean, definitionally, a job is a bundle of tasks, a bundle of work activities. And you could think, oh, well, if I want to accomplish more of this, I need to hire more people to do that. But there's a very fluid unbundling and rebundling that happens all the time, especially with generative AI. So that is so on everyone's mind, especially from a strategic planning perspective. So if you are going to take that seriously, and if you are going to do workforce planning with AI augmentation and automation in mind, you really need to have a good sense of what are the work activities that people are doing. And so, we've seen this sometimes called task intelligence, but I think one huge area for us is creating a universal taxonomy of work activities. And this is something that, we've been kind of beating the drum on for a while, but I think for, in the recent past, there's so much more openness to this idea that, we need to manage our workforce around work activities, and not necessarily around jobs or skills. So I think that's obviously, there's a lot of efficiency when you bundle work into jobs, and that's probably not going anywhere. But either way, from a strategic planning perspective, having this task intelligence is really important. So that's where SWP comes in. Lots to say on that, I'm sure, but just to kind of round out, like, who else uses this? A lot of compensation benchmarking as well, mostly because traditional compensation benchmarking tools are really not at the peer level. You get your own pay, and you can benchmark that to some anonymous peer set, and you don't really know who's in it. You don't know how it's changing, how it's updated. So getting more resolution in how you compare in terms of compensation is also really important in the age of pay transparency, which is also only a couple years old.
You're right. Well, Ben, thank you for sharing. I get really excited when I hear you speak to this, because you have an uncommon level of eloquence on how this can be done. Where I get frustrated is that, well, I'll call what Jeffrey Pfeffer long called the knowing doing gap. Like, at this stage of my life and career and my longevity in the people analytics space, workforce planning and talent intelligence, employee experience, all that stuff, I am frustrated that leaders, not only individually but collectively, aren't considering this information in systematic, ongoing ways to formulate, measure, and manage strategy. Not only the employee experience, but workforce strategy, how orgs are designed. And so the idea that, hey, I don't know what people are doing or what work activities or tasks there, that's a choice. That's actually, you can get higher resolution, higher fidelity that you're talking about. And for me, there's a huge gap into the governance models that consume this insight and in turn take appropriate action over time. So my question to you will land in this way, because I want to go back to this idea of what I'll call work strategy, where you understand work, you make conscious decisions. Is it going to be done by employees, contractors, outsourced providers, robotic automation, AI? But that means almost by implicitly that not only is HR in the room, it's finance, it's operations, it's ITIS, it's if you have somebody who's facilitating transformation, then they would have to be in the room as well.
And
So where I'm going to land with the question, if you're fast forwarding over the next 6 to 12 months, given the pace of change, and maybe you already have a handful of customers who are already doing this. I mean, what's the ideal future state for using the insight that you're bringing to the floor? Is it a cross-functional, leadership team that has a recurring rhythm to consuming this data and are making systematic decisions? I mean, I'm obviously planning a potential answer, so I'll shamelessly own that. But really, I mean, if I'm sitting here as an executive and I'm like, Ben, this is great, this is great, this is great, I do not know where it lands in my organization. I don't know, so can you speak to that?
I mean, I wish I could speak to that, but I mean, I think what I struggle with is that, every organization is, is set up so differently, and where workforce planning happens is sometimes in a center of companies. Sometimes it's within operations. Sometimes it's within HR, and there's I don't know that I can really say what's best, but I feel like the question is really, yeah. I mean, here's what I'll say to that, which is kind of like both a non-answer and a meta answer. Um, I think I think one I think one strategy for organizing things that I think is undervalued is sort of shifting the borders between organizations more and less about moving people from one place to another. So I think there's you know there's been a lot of reskilling initiatives or reallocation initiatives that have not been successful. We've been seeing waves of failures of these projects, and it's in some way confusing because you look at the business case and it's so clear, and you're like, oh well, recruiting costs a bunch of money, but if you just like train people in this, they can like bridge this gap, and it's so much easier and more efficient, and bada bing bada boom, everyone's going to be better off, yay. And there's so many business cases that get made that way, but I think the reality is it's just very organizationally difficult to move people from one place to another because managers probably don't care about whether, if they lose someone to a different team that they have no relationship with within the same company, or if they lose someone totally outside of the organization. I think, it would be very nice if everyone were kind of aligned to the organizational goals, but that's, there's a lot of like principal agent problems that kind of come up. So it doesn't happen so easily. And I think rather than kind of shifting people, I think shifting the borders of orgs could be really helpful. So if you say, oh well, we're overweight in this type of these types of people and underweight in those types of people, well maybe where you're overweight, you give them more responsibilities that don't need to be in under the same umbrella as something else. So you say, oh well, maybe we have a lot of people that are skilled in this sort of thing, like within HR, and we're underweight in finance. So okay, so there's things that you can allocate that now sit in finance that could sit in HR. So I would say reallocating the responsibilities is probably easier than reallocating the people. So that's just one. Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is that having an org structure that is too rigid could potentially be a detriment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me put this scenario in front of you because I see it happening, and maybe you do as well, particularly given your background in capital markets. So we have executive leadership teams. We have CFOs who are looking at numbers and they're saying, well, we can gain efficiencies based on AI or outsourcing or automation, and there's a host of assumptions embedded in that, some of which are conscious, some of which are unconscious.
Yeah.
And then there's a process to reduce the workforce, and this is just an example. And that process oftentimes, in my experience, has been blind to the embedded value of the skills and relationship equity and a variety of other value aspects, if you will, or characteristics that, if highlighted, might pause certain decisions. So, in other words, I see a kind of a very broad-based, old process, going down to division or even a team. All right, we need to cut heads. You give us one person in your group to, and it's just so at the end of it, in an ideal future state, it would be much better to have a high fidelity view into the workforce and its value, and then to your point, maybe repurposing the work based on your understanding of the work, because if you don't have it,
Yeah.
you're not gonna be able to do it. So that means that finance has to be open to appreciating the relationship to human capital, to use that term.
Yeah.
And HR can be a facilitator of that, but historically they've kind of been the owner and they're selling this insight to the finance group. And it's just like they're not on the same team. It's like it's a battle of whose data is better and who's going to carry the weight. And meanwhile, CEOs are like, whatever, I just know I need to be more efficient and effective. So, bring me that. And oftentimes the CFO carries the day. So,
Yeah.
with that all in mind, that's where I ask from an ideal future state standpoint, like instead of doing this macro decision up here that's ill-informed, how can, if a macro decision is made up here, how can it actually be better informed? And for me, again, to show my bias, that means they're
Yeah.
better cross-functional governance, and the insight that cross-functional governance team is, number one, better, but it's also understood across those domains as opposed to just HR having the understanding of it. So I know I shared a lot
Yeah.
there, but I just wanted to kind of press on that point and get your reaction.
I totally agree with the diagnosis. I mean, here's a take. That, these battles in some way arise from kind of low frequency analyses. So, you have you have some mandate from the CEO, and then, HR does something, finance does something, and then in the worst case, then they go hire, McKinsey or Mercer or whatever to kind of, create some other project, and they win the day. And in most of these projects, I think I'd go so far as to say, in the vast majority of these projects, the most time is really spent just getting the data together. So I think, I'm biased on this, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think if the data is clean and organized, if you have a good understanding of like what are your roles, what are your headcounts, what are the tasks, what are the skills, if you have everything mapping to each other really nicely, that updates in real time, that's like properly, versioned and shared, across the organization. If it's cross-functional, you don't want to have like different data sets from different organizations disagreeing with each other. If you have ubiquitous shared information, then the feedback loop from some strategic mandate to the actual analysis, which gives you an answer, can be very fast. Then it's just, people sit in a room, they know what data they're looking at, they pull something, they've got pre-made reports or dashboards or whatever, and then they make the decision, based on the real-time data and what it's telling them. I mean, I think these reductions are probably a function of not knowing where they're going to be in 6 months and not wanting to redo this analysis. So they say, hey, we're making decisions on headcounts for the next year. And, it looks like generative AI is going to automate some stuff. So let's just make that call today because, we don't want to have to revisit this. But if this data were coming in every week or every month or something, you wouldn't need to plan for this, eventuality that is based on, outdated data. So I think having, a good job architecture, a good data infrastructure, a streamlined process around getting the right information in front of the right people helps this feedback loop tremendously.
Yeah, I celebrate that so much. And I also, I'm going to own my bias again. If I say, kick me in the shins, it's like I have an approach: first who, then what. So you're bringing this intelligence to the fore, and it's massively valuable. However, it's only valuable if it's used. And then it invites the question, who's using it? And are they using it in isolation, or are they using it systematically as part of the team? In other words, they know the trade-offs and are making a collective decision. Because I am, in my own work, I am studying leader decision-making, not only individually, but from a team, from a governance, standpoint. And what I'm finding is that the systems and processes aren't in place to consume the information that is there, and in turn take appropriate action and iterate at the appropriate frequency, as you're talking about.
Yeah.
It cannot be annually now. And I cannot think of
Yeah.
an organization, maybe if you're a mining company, you can do that, but the
Yeah.
world is moving too fast. So at the very least, quarterly, maybe semi-annually. So, and I know it depends. So, but this is where, I want to come back to this, first who, then what. You mentioned HR, and I celebrate people analytics and talent intelligence and workforce planning and how it's evolved over the years. Frustratingly for me, they have been different groups, oftentimes workforce
Yeah.
planning and talent acquisition, and are not looking really at what's happening within the organization at that point in time. They're not thinking about facilitating internal mobility and different design options, and in turn have recruiting be potentially a laggard consciously process, to fill gaps that cannot be filled internally. That's been an aspiring goal of many organizations, but I just haven't seen them build, again, the systems and processes and have the requisite data to make these decisions. It just hasn't, in other words, been worth the effort. So at the end of it, for Revelio Labs and the insights that you're bringing to the fore, both now and into the future, do you see a future where operations is involved? You mentioned comp, so it gets beyond HR.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's funny, like, where you stand depends on where you sit. And like, I think I'm building a product, and that's kind of my perspective. And you in contrast, like you're changing orgs, you're changing people's minds. Like I think we're sort of, trying to accomplish the same outcomes. And like, I think when I say I really mean the whole company, Revelio Labs. Like, I don't think our strength is in change management, is in kind of org design. Really, I think our strengths are in data and technology and product, and I think the way we kind of segment our organization, we have a data sourcing team, we have an infrastructure team, a data science team, an economics team, a front end team, and then we have our sales team. And I think, what I sometimes say to the sales team is like, find whoever you want, like go crazy, like there's no territories, just whoever could get use out of this, like, get some discretion. And I think that's in some way not easy. Like, I think having an ideal, customer is just, it's easy. It's easy to sell a product that's built around a very precise use case. It's very easy to sell a product that's like an application for a workflow. Because then you're like, oh, do you do this workflow? Great, I have the perfect solution for you. And the reality is, like, that's not what we are as Revelio Labs. We're not building like workflow specific applications. We're building something. We're building, a data and analytics layer that can be used for anything where you're analyzing data. So I think it's a harder sale and it's a harder way to grow a business. But I think it's the only way to end up being cross functional. So this idea of like, finance and HR and leaders of business units and like corp dev and whatever, all of them looking at the same thing. I think it's got to be built in a cross-functional way. So I think it's like probably hurting us in the short term, but I think that's just how we want to build,
Well, hey, I got a couple more questions and we'll
start
to wrap up. So there's this notion, you mentioned it earlier, and it relates to what you just shared, is that the idea of being a skills-based organization or doing skills-based workforce planning, and there's been a bunch of articles and research that shows that hasn't been delivering and that we've overweighted on skills. I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think, okay, so yeah, I I love skills as a unit of analysis. I love having skills data, super useful data. Where I think the field has gone wrong is treating skills like they are components of work. I think we see this a lot with a lot of vendors that are like, you know, skills tech vendors, however you want to think about it. I think they sometimes say, well, you know, you've got your jobs, your occupations, and you can think of a job as a bundle of skills. And that's just definitionally wrong. Like, skills are not attributes of jobs. They are attributes of people. And along with a whole other set of attributes of people. You know, you've got knowledge, skills, abilities, you know, various different attributes that people have. And then you have your components of jobs, which are activities. So I think thinking about skills as inputs into completing work activities there's a nuance, but it's really important, because if you don't do that carefully, you end up with all sorts of downstream problems where, you know, you start using skills for things it was never meant to be used for, and ultimately I think one kind of warning sign is that the actual business units, the lines of business, aren't focused on skills as the unit of analysis, because it doesn't really matter, you know, like what attributes are used to complete some work. What ultimately matters at the end of the day is the work that gets done and the ability to, you know, reach goals. So I think, you know, if you do want to have a more flexible view on how work gets done, you can think of that as coming from people, from you know, machines, from, you know, and even within people, there's employees, there's freelancers, there's whatever, you know, and so I think trying to, you know, make everything about skills is a mistake. Having said that, it's super important, like, to take skills really seriously and it, you know, and analyze the attributes of people that we can identify. So I think just being thoughtful about what skills are and kind of where they fit in the structure of work and jobs and all that, I think it requires a little bit of nuance, and I get nervous when I see that nuance sort of being hand waved away. So I think we've sort of gone a little bit too far, but I don't want to throw out skills, you know.
Yeah, no, I believe it's part of the equation as well, but there is arguably an overweighting, and to your point earlier, it is about work strategy. It is about work activities and how those map to skills. And I just, you know, that complexity I've seen many shy away from. And so, you know, part of, I guess, your job as well as mine is stepping into that complexity, making it simple, yes, but not overly simple. We got to appreciate, again, the nuances that you shared. So
Yeah, and by the way, just a plug while we're on it, I've got a book coming out on this called Job Architecture, where I really go through, like, what is the relationship between skills, jobs, activities, and just thinking, like, all right, what can I say, you know, like can there be some authoritative guide on how to think about taxonomies and how they fit together and how to use certain things? So I'm trying to introduce a little bit more rigor to something that I think has been too sloppy.
Yeah, absolutely love it. Anything else you want to share about the book, and what's the release date?
Yeah, it's coming out January 13th with Wiley. You can pre-order on Amazon. It's called Job Architecture. The subtitle is Building a Language for Workforce Intelligence. So get to use that workforce intelligence line there too. But yeah, it's really about the nuts and bolts of taxonomies, like why we need them, you know, what they're used for, how to think about, you know, the essence of work systematically, rigorously through more of kind of an economics lens. And then there's a little bit more of a how-to also of, like, all right, now you want to build taxonomies. How do you start? How do you use LLMs? How do you think about clustering and labeling and versioning and all these things that, you know, people don't think about before they go and, you know, hire Will Stowers Watson to build it for them.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. We'll look forward to giving that a read for sure. So, final question. What's your advice to young people, whether they be students or early career professionals, given everything that's happening in the world right now?
Young people are having a tough time. So yeah, there's a recent paper that just came out by Eric Brynjolfsson and a couple of his co-authors called "Canaries in the Coal Mine," which really highlights some research that we've done as well that young people are really being affected the most from AI automation. I think my view on this is that that's a real phenomenon. That companies are nervous about AI automation, and they're not hiring as much, and new entrants to the workforce are obviously affected more. I think there's I mean, I mentioned before that jobs are bundles of tasks, bundles of work activities. There's a slight addendum to that I want to make. When you're doing a job, you're not just executing on work activities. You're also you're not just a job isn't simply a bundle of activities. It's also coordination between those activities. So as a worker, you are not just an executor, you're also a coordinator. So you're doing coordination between different tasks. And what AI and generative LLMs do is the execution. There's some tasks that they're well suited to execute, but they're not designed to coordinate between tasks. Now maybe that can change with like agentic whatever, but at least for now, there's as execution gets easier, the value of coordination gets more valuable. So older workers have the ability to execute, to orchestrate rather, to sort of coordinate between people, and that's what comes with experience. You work with teams, you kind of figure out what the bottlenecks are. That's management in a way. And so I think what I would encourage young people to focus on is using LLMs to build things and coordinating between those various work activities. So I would say rather than, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to tell them what not to learn, but I would say that they should try to find some time to just build something, to build a product, do some vibe coding, just make something that kind of has to work end to end, and they'll find themselves doing a lot of coordination to get that done. And I think that's where the economic returns will be.
In the coordination.
In coordination. I think there's high returns to coordination. I also think, another thing I've just been thinking about, which is not based on data or labor economics, but just my own like personal view, is that I think knowledge and skill are kind of put at too high of a premium right now, and I think what's kind of underweighted is just being a functional professional. Just how to manage your calendar, being responsive, just being easy to work with, just like, know how to send out a calendar invite. Just having, being good at like responding to emails quickly, like that. There's huge returns to that, and I think that's unfortunately in limited supply. But I think just like various like general professionalism, I think is just it can be practiced. Like that can be learned. So I would say just like get a move on, start building things, start coordinating, start like doing professional things, and that's my take on where the returns are.
Well, thank you for saying that. I am going to shamelessly share that snippet with my kids, and they're going to yell at me, but that's going to be okay. No, it's fantastic to hear you share, and congratulations, Ben, on everything you and the Revelio Labs team has created. And I'm going to see you in a couple weeks there at HR Tech. What else is planned for you this fall?
So yeah, HR Tech's a big one. We're also going to PsyOp. That's gonna be fun. It's gonna be my first time going to PsyOp. What else? And then this book launch coming out like in the winter. So gearing up for that. I don't know what's gonna be involved, but publisher will tell me what to do. So I just keeping things open. You know.
All right. Again, Ben, thank you for joining me today. All the best to you and see you soon.
You
All right,
too.
be well.
Thanks.
All right.